But I asked each one of the men that were with me to share a story with him. And I was like, don't hold back. I want it to be raw. I want it to be vulnerable. I want it to be real. He's looking at us older men thinking we've all got it together. I want him to know that number one, we don't all have it together. Hard stuff has happened to us in our lives. And number two, but that we'll be there for him. Each of the guys shared their stories. And man, I didn't even know some of their stories.
I thought as a dive in point to this conversation, Roy, when you were thinking about having this chat with me on Dad Awesome, just talking fatherhood, what did it stoke up? What parts of the journey of being a son, being a dad, just anything bubble to the top that you're like, this is where my heart went when I thought about talking about being an awesome dad.
Yeah, well, I think when we first chatted, it was just something that totally resonated with me because it's something that I've striven to be, is beyond everything else, is to be an awesome dad. And I think often we get caught up in what we're doing and the things that we are busy doing. But at the end of the day, I kind of figure there's going to be a point where I won't be the international director for Christian surfers. I might have a tiny little grandkid on my lap. And that is important. That is the value to have that in a cohesive family and to be in that space. Well, that looking back, it'll probably be a lot more important than all the stuff I spend worrying about right now. So,
Mm.
and I think that comes from God's heart. So yeah, I think that resonated when we started talking about it. I was like, man, I really like this idea and this subject. So yeah.
Wonderful. Now, where your journey, sometimes it's helpful to go back before we go forward. As a son, I've heard a couple little stories about your dad. And I think there was a moment where you got caught skipping school to go surfing with your dad. So I've heard that story. But
Yeah.
yeah, help us know a little bit about your journey as a son and your dad, and maybe even is there anything that your dad did that you're like, oh, I wanna bring that to my son and my daughter. So yeah, just reflect on that with us for a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I think when you're growing up, you're not thinking about that. You're just doing and living life, you know.
Mhm.
And then as you become a dad, you start looking back, and I think you start reflecting on your own dad. And then I think as a believer, you start reflecting on that with your father in heaven. So
Yeah.
I had a wonderful dad. He passed away earlier this year. And I had a wonderful granddad who also loved Jesus very much. And yeah, I had this incredible, I'm just jumping in, be pretty vulnerable, but I had this incredible picture the week after he passed away. I was in church and I was worshiping. And as I was doing that, I saw him standing there in glory with his, standing in glory. It was very vivid, very vivid. And next to him was my granddad. And then next to them was a third person. And I remember saying to the Lord, why can't I see the face of the third person? I can't make them out. And just like that, I felt the Holy Spirit say, well, that's your great granddad. You've never met him, so you can't recognize him. So I don't know, that was just a strange thing that happened during worship. But my dad was a legend. There's a marathon in South Africa called the Comrades Marathon. It's an ultra marathon. It's 90 something kilometers. He ran 27 of those marathons. And to quote my brother, he said, well, Dad had no quit in him. And I remember him waking up in the morning and going, Dad, what are you doing? It's like, oh, I'm going to run to work. I'm like, you work about like 20 miles away, Dad. He's like, yeah, but this is training. And I'm like, well, how are you going to get home? Oh, I'm going to run home. And yeah, so
Wow.
he was an incredible guy in that space and a loving father, did all that he could for us. Um, and then there was an interesting moment because this really kind of played out with my son. He went through a lot of difficult times in the 80s. They lost their business. They were, blindsided by some Christian partners and financial crisis. They lost everything. And he chose to take work. The only work he could find was nowhere near me and my mom and my brothers.
Mm.
And it's interesting because from the age of 13 to 16, 17, he wasn't around that much. But his choice was it was a self-sacrificial love that he did that. He literally wasn't there because he wanted to keep us in home, wanted to keep a roof over our heads, and could just find the jobs that he wanted. But when my son turned 12, I remember turning to my wife in panic and saying, I don't know
Mm.
how to be a dad to a teenager. She said, what do you mean? I was like, well, my dad wasn't there. So I don't have a roadmap. I've always had a roadmap, but now I don't know what to do. And her words were so wise. It's like, well, that's why you have a heavenly father. Um, and yeah, what a beautiful journey it's been.
Mm. I know that part of the journey with your son at that moment, kind of 12, 13, was recruiting some other men to help father him. So you weren't doing it on your own, and some just intentionality around that. Would you share a little bit about that story of how you pulled together a crew around him?
Yeah, sure. So maybe if it's okay to take two steps back. So
Yeah.
for me, the thing that I'm most passionate about is God's kingdom. Um, and the reason is because, well, that'll probably come out a little bit later, but there was a moment in Christian Surfers when my kids were really young. We'd moved to Jeffreys Bay, and I was working really hard, flat out. Um, and I probably was not being the greatest dad because I was putting career and work way ahead of anything else that I was doing. And at that point, there was a amazing woman that came and wanted to have dinner with us. She's got a great gift, a prophetic gift.
Mm.
She said, Roy, I see you and the team sitting around and planning Christian surfers events in South Africa, and things are going great. And you've got this internship program that's looking good. And I really saw all of this effort and energy, and I was so excited. And then I started feeling grieved. And I was like, Lord, why am I feeling grieved?
Mhm.
And she said, I looked up, and in the kitchen was your wife and your children and Jesus. And basically, it was like, she pulled the two barrels and went bang, bang. She's like, it was literally the Holy Spirit saying, it's great that you're doing all this stuff for me in ministry, but what are you doing with your family? And I remember feeling really convicted about this and struggling with it and trying to deny it. And then having a chat with my wife, and she said, well, let's fix this, like when you come home from work, close the laptop and be present. Like that's it. Like m make that time important. And then after the kids in bed, then you can open it up and carry on. And I committed to that as a practice, as a little system. And wow, I mean, mate, if you want to know, like the way that is the re return that is reaped
Mm.
is phenomenal. And so if you fast forward to when Nathan turned 13, I'd read several books. I guess that and one other thing from our pastor was the journey into wanting to be a good dad. Um, and realizing that none of us are, or,
Yep.
we want to be great dads, but that actually takes work and intentionality. And man, so many times I'm like, oh gosh, blew it again, blew it again. But it also takes a call to walk alongside Jesus, I think. Not just Jesus, but our Father in heaven. And as a young guy, I remember having a strong faith, and just remember a moment where I almost felt Jesus said, "You got to get to know the Father." It was a strange thing, But going on a journey of what does it mean to have God as my Father has been the greatest gift, I think, of anything in my life, other than my salvation.
And yeah, I guess maybe even before you talk about the process with your son, uh, the book "Fathered by God," I know has
Mm.
been a maybe a recent adventure with your son to like be reading. This is written by John Eldridge. I'm actually in a men's group right here in Flagler Beach on that book right
Wow.
now. It's my second read through it. Yeah, talk about that book just a little bit of this slice. I know you guys were just in the first kind of third of the book together, but yeah, just to go into the theme of being fathered by God and him experiencing him as a loving father and some
Mm.
of the takeaways from the book. Can you share a little bit about that
Yeah, sure.
resource?
So I'm not all the way through the book because I've chosen to go step by step with my son. So we're going through a chapter together. Um, I think it's just an ingenious book because it just kind of maps out a pathway for men and their sons to follow. I think you can do some stuff with your daughter too. So for sure, for me, being a father is about being a father to a son and a daughter. And there's great adventures that I've had with Kaylin that I can share. But I think what's beautiful about this particular book is so much of it resonates with the journey that I've been on. And so much of it is wanting to let Nathan understand, look, there's these definite mile markers.
Hmm.
To become a man and a father and a husband, it requires you to be, the boy who has fun, then the cowboy, then the warrior, the lover, the king, and then the sage,
Yeah.
which is the map of the book. Um, and just it's just another intentional thing to do. Like finding those intentional moments to create pathways with your kids is so important. And I think when we were prepping for this podcast, I thought like, what, why does this resonate so deeply with me? And I remember the day my daughter turned 2. I was leading worship. I was running Christian Surfers in South Africa. I was the worship pastor of our church, and I was leading worship that evening. And I was like, well, she's 2 years old. She's not going to miss me, like she's not even going to know that I'm not there. So it was her birthday. We had a little birthday party in the afternoon, and then I went off to do worship. And on Monday morning, my pastor Pedro called me in, and he was like, "Hey, I saw you on worship last night." And I'm like, "Yep." And he goes, "But wasn't it your daughter's birthday?" And I'm like, "Yep, she turned 2." And he was like, "Well, why were you on worship?" And I was like, "Well, I don't really think that she's going to miss me. She's too young to even remember." Man, that was the wrong thing to say to this man. He was like the Don. Like he's a incredible human, one of the greatest mentors of my life. And he just pushed back in his chair and in a very gentle way, he went, I think you need to just take a break from worship for a bit. That's all he said. He didn't say why, didn't give me excuses. And I think the gentleness of being fathered by him as an older mentor built something in me that is completely unreasonable in my current job, and that is that I just will not miss a birthday. I've just committed to never missing my kids' birthdays. My daughter's 21 and my son is now 18. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that little moment, that little gift of a mentor or being part of a local church has changed so much of my life because there's just days when I've been like, no, I can't make that conference. No, I can't be there, or I have to leave early. But what it's done on the other side, and I realize how unreasonable this is. I mean, it really is unreasonable to be an international director that never misses children. And I know that I couldn't ask everyone in my movement to do the same thing. So I'm aware of the paradox in this. But for my children, they've never been second to the ministry, ever.
Roy, my memories are flashing so fast in my heart right now and in my mind around the last 4 years because I've been full time with Dad Awesome for 4 years, and I have 4 daughters. And so I have 5 birthdays, really, my wife's and my like to really protect. Of 365 days in the year, I have 5 birthdays to protect because they're okay if for my birthday, if I want to do an event for work or whatever, they're
Yeah,
fine.
I'm the same.
Nothing taken. But there's 5 dates on the calendar. And I have, within the last 2 months, flown out on a birthday to an event. I've hosted 100-mile bike rides on my daughter's birthday twice in the last few years. These are our ministry events, Fathers for the Fatherless. I feel the Holy Spirit's like, you can calibrate and follow Roy's lead right now. I can. And the in the ministry is called Dad Awesome. I fully have the ability to say no to opportunities on those 5 dates every year, but I haven't. So
Yeah.
thank you. And now I've
Well,
shared it with other people to hear my
yeah, and I know, not everyone can do that. Not everyone's called to it.
yeah,
Look, having 3 instead of 5, it does make it easier. But the value that I've got from it, mate, I wouldn't trade that for anything.
yeah.
And I can tell you specific moments when I had to go. I was a speaker at a conference in South America. It was a big area conference. They really wanted me there, and they wanted me there. Conference was for 5 days. And I remember saying, I can't make it. Like, there's no way. I just logistically, I've done everything I could to. And I was like, guys, you just don't need me to be there. And they're like, you have to come. And I literally eventually flew out for 48 hours. I waited for the birthday to be done, you know, kissed my kids and family goodbye on
Yep.
the next day and shot
Yes.
across. And I think the value though on this side, as they get older, it's going to get easier. So there's a point where that's the other thing. I read this. There's a great book called The World Needs a Father. Um, and he proposes that you're the greatest influence in your child's life from the ages of 1 to 11. That goes by in a flash. Like it's gone in a second. You have 11 years, and those are the craziest 11 years where you sleep deprived, you're trying to get your career going.
Yeah.
There's a million things happening. But before you know it, you'll be on the other side of that. And for me, the pathways that you lay in those 11 years are what count.
Yeah.
So I'll give you another fun little story.
Great.
I heard a sermon from a church. Again, it's amazing how local church and community builds into this because we can't. There's a great proverb says it takes a village to raise a child.
Mhm.
And I think in the modern world, we get lost. We don't spend time in villages. We spend time in tiny little communities that are of our peers. The church is the one institution that calls us back to the village. Because in the church, there'll be someone older and there'll be someone younger. And there's so much wisdom in those little moments when an older guy will come and grab your arm and say you should do something, or tension, give you a bit of like, no, mate, you need to up your game on this one, or pray with you.
Mm.
And and I got completely sidetracked now of what I was basically gonna say. Um, yeah,
Well,
it's
while you're
gone.
thinking about it, your pastor who pulled you aside when you led worship that night,
Yeah.
what a gift for someone to see something they know is true about you. You value your family, and
Mm,
to bench you from like, I'm going to take you out of this because you didn't live with what's important to you. I mean, like the gift of that, having mentors, having a boss, having
yeah.
like brotherhood that will do that. I
Mm,
actually wanted to just glance down. I thought this might come up. So this is a Tom Petty lyric. Won't
right.
back down on my coffee mug this morning. I thought that it might come up in conversation. I thought of your dad and his resilience and just like, wow, all these ultra marathons. But I also thought of you and the conviction around your son, your daughter, your wife's birthdays. We use this phrase, I won't back down, around personal finance, around physical accomplishments, around job pursuits, businesses we launch. We use this, I'm not going to be someone who backs down. But
Mm,
do we use this expression and kind of mantra of I'm going to be a dad who doesn't back down from treasuring my kids, maximizing the 11 years of highest influence, highest molding. Um,
yeah.
yeah, any reflections on that concept of just I won't back down?
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely critical because there's so many places where I won't back down would come into play. I think of little moments where you just have to your kids just need to know that you've got their back, that you're not going to make it easy for them. You're not going to give them a free pass, but you just won't back down. Um, and and you can do that in different ways. You can do it in a good way, you can do it in a bad way. Um, but ultimately they need to know that my dad's got my back and he
Yeah.
won't back down, you
Yeah,
know.
that's a great point though. There's times
And
where we need to back down and apologize or soften up. There's that side too to the phrase.
yes, but sometimes I think that I love that phrase, the way you put the phrase, because I won't back down. There might be times when you need to soften. And once recently, I had to say to my daughter, she's 21 now, babes, I'm sorry because I stepped in and was your dad. I went all dad on this situation, and I didn't acknowledge that you're an action adult, and I should have come to you because it was your choice. When I just went in guns blazing because I thought someone was going to hurt you, so I just, you know, didn't back down,
Yeah.
recognizing that probably the wisdom would have been to not back down, but in not backing down in this situation would have meant something different. So in this situation would have been I have got your back, I'm behind you, but you're the adult, you need to take the step. So how do I back you instead of jumping in front of you. And that still is true to your term, don't back down, because it's the same
Yeah.
thing. It's saying I'm not backing down. I'm willing to
Hmm.
go as far as it needs to go, but I recognize that you're an adult. I do actually remember what I was going to say. I
Great.
listened to this sermon, and it was the best sermon I'd ever. There's that scripture, train a child up in the way they should go, and when they're older, they will not depart from it. But this is the first time I've heard it done in this way. And the pastor just said, that's not about you training up your child in the way that you want them to go. It's about you figuring out what God has built into your child and then allowing that to flourish. So you need to train them up in the way that He has designed for them to go. And when they were old, they will not depart from it. And that took me down a little journey of thinking, I need to find pathways. I need to find pathways that will allow me to connect. 1 to 11 is easy. They love you, they're going to jump in your arms. And,
Yeah.
it's really about making time. Like the greatest gift we can give people is time. It's the only resource you can't ever get any more of. You can't buy any more of. It's given to you one day at a time. Um, and I was trying to think about what these pathways would be. And the one pathway was my son loved playing video games. I don't. No desire to play video games. A different era. Anyway, I was on a work trip. I was on totally different time zones. I was on the California coast. It's hours different. It's really different to South Africa. And I had the iPad and I had to do an update on Fortnite. And it was a super, super important thing.
Mhm.
And he was like, Dad, you got to get this update done on this particular day.
Okay.
So the challenge with this update was like I was tired. It was the end of the day. I really didn't have any desire. And I was like, you know what? This is important to him. I'm gonna do it. So I did the update and wanting to go to sleep middle of the night. And as I pushed go, I heard this little voice on the other side of the iPad. Hey, Dad, are you awake? So I forgot the time zones.
Yeah.
And so me and Nathi had this little game on Fortnite together. I had no idea what I was doing. I was getting completely shot up but we played on different sides of the world at different points in time. And I realized like I just got to figure out his pathway, and for my daughter as well. And then I read a great book by Bob Goff called Love Does. And
Yeah.
so me and Kaylin went on, she wrote the script for her 16th birthday, and I made it happen. She wanted to surf small warm waves, and we raised the funds. We did what we needed to do, and we went to Thailand together, on a front end of a Christian surface thing. So those little pathways, you can discover them. And it's the joy of that pathway. It's the
Mhm.
excitement that you can find in unexpected places.
Yes.
What makes me think of how God loves us.
Mhm.
Because I think he's built us in that way. And, for me, getting up and going for a surf is something that, is amazing. And I think we forget that he would probably love to spend that kind of time with us.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Such like the visual of God loving to spend time with us and to find the pathways that like are how he's wired us and created us. And then we as dads find those pathways of connection with our kids and how God's made them. I'm realizing sometimes I have conversations where I just dive in deep and then have to like pull back out for a moment. So to pan out for a moment, we've been talking little bits about the ministry, Christian Surfers, and I'm realizing I know about the ministry and the great impact and the decades and decades. I've actually heard from the original founder. I've heard his perspective and I've heard you share on it. But Christian Surfers, the vision, there's a local chapter just up the road from where I live here in Florida, the St. Augustine chapter. What is the to help a dad who doesn't know anything about Christian Surfers? Could you just give us the flyover of the impact, the ministry, and why you're in with your whole heart serving in that ministry.
Yeah, so the vision is pretty simple. We want every surfer and every surfing community to have the opportunity to both know and follow Jesus. And what that looks like is we share the good news of Jesus. We do this in communities of faith. And that Christian Surfers currently is working in 37 countries around the world. We have probably close on 200 local weekly meetings, chapters. And then you can find us in all sorts of other places. YouVersion Bible app, if you type in Christian Surfers, there'll be Bible reading plans online and in all the regular social spaces. we're just trying to connect surfers that know Jesus with the opportunity to take that surfing and use it for mission and ministry. And then surfers that don't know Jesus. The other thing you can go check out is thesurfersbible.com.
Yes, I have a copy of it. Yes, it's so good.
So good. So good. That was a great project because we built a analog handaway Bible, but with a digital backend. So there's all these curated QR videos that are linked with QR codes.
So the reason I wanted to at least mention, because again, some of the dads are not near a surfing community, but the finding a subculture niche that man, if we can reach this, look what God will do through relationships in these pockets of communities that have deep connection, brotherhood, sisterhood, community, love for each other, love for the sport,
Mm.
but are not connected with the local church, and the local churches are not figuring out ways to engage. And so I know there's so much more there. I'm going to link out though for everyone who wants to find out about the
Yeah.
Christian Surfers Bible and all the other resources you guys, the YouVersion Bible app, all those different tools. So thank you for your leadership, and who knows how Dad Awesome and Christian Surfers, maybe there'll be even more collaborative ways we can approach
Absolutely.
that. And then the other pan out is just your son, your daughter, their current age, and then how long have you been married? What's your wife's name?
My wife's name is Sharon, and she is the real hero of our family.
Yes.
We've been married for 26 years. She is my soulmate and the love of my life. Is the quiet one in the background that has pioneered so much of everything that I've done or been involved in. Then my son is Nathan, and he's just turned 17. And my daughter is Kaylin, and she's 21. And that's our little family. Yeah.
Amazing. And I know your daughter just got back from New Zealand doing an amazing
Hmm.
ministry school there. And then yeah, your son, we started to go down this story, but then we hit a few other topics. But the conversation that we had back 6 months ago when we first met, Roy,
Mm.
around intentional moments for your son and bringing other um, people alongside him. Could you take us through a little bit of what you prayerfully
Yeah.
crafted for
So
him?
so I had a real sense that there needed to be a transition into manhood. He was, turning 13. I know that's a biblical thing, and I've been reading some stuff around that. In South Africa here, there's a tribe called the Xhosa tribe, and they have a very intentional and very like hectic way of young boys transitioning into manhood. Um, and so I was thinking about this, and I thought, I'm going to build something out, and based on what I'd read and understood. And I spent quite a good bit of time thinking about this. And I wanted it to be different to the trip that I took my daughter and then him on later on when he turned 16. So at 13, like I did a couple of things. I asked several men that I had relationship with around the world, in all parts of the world, to write stories. Some of them really amazing, men like the founder of Christian Surfers, Brett Davis, was one of them, a famous surfboard shaper. Um, and others that I had relationship with, but had exemplified this like solid kingdom centric life. And I asked them to write me stories of and a special message to Nathan as he, and either in written form or in video form.
Hmm.
I curated those stories. Then I asked a couple men to get involved with me. So it was myself and Nathi, was my one of my best friends and his son, another best friend and his son, and then an older guy who, often fulfilled the function of like a granddad.
Yeah.
And we all surfers. So we packed the car to the hilt with surfboards. We said goodbye to the moms and the women's, and we just headed out on a wild adventure. And on the adventure, we would push them every day. So I'd be like, look, mate, you're going to paddle out at this spot. And they'd be like, what? Are you for real? I'd be like, yep, you're going out. And they'd have to, there was no moms, there was no safety nets. We were going out.
Yes.
I remember jumping off the front of the rocks with him, like his eyes wide open, like pretty intense, to be honest. Way, way more intense than his mom would have been comfortable with had she been there. In fact, she would have gone flat out no. So get out to the back and he paddles into this wave, and he drops in, and I can still remember his little face. I mean, the thing is like 3 times overhead for him.
Yes.
Comes paddling back and he's like, Dad, that's the biggest wave I've ever caught in my life. So that was the fun side, the adventure, a little bit of the, the warrior, like give it a go. And then
Yeah.
in the evenings, we'd have a fire. We'd cook in South Africa. It's a barbecue. It's called a braai.
Yeah.
It's a very much part of our culture. So every evening we'd have a braai, and I'd make sure it was really good, nice food. But I asked each one of the men that were with me to share a story with him. And I was like, don't hold back. I want it to be raw. I want it to be vulnerable. I want it to be real. Like he's looking at us as, older men, thinking we've all got it together. I want him to know that number one, we don't all have it together. Hard stuff has happened to us in our lives. And number two, but that we'll be there for him. So each of the guys shared their stories. And man, I didn't even know some of their stories. One person shared about just the pain of being bullied and absolutely betrayed by friends, another dad shared on how he had got together with his surfing crew, to go and watch a surf video, and this guy had put on a porn movie, and how he felt in that moment, and how he struggled after that moment. And another, so as we went around the room, we shared these really, really like raw, life-oriented stories, of the real men that we were, these not perfect
Yeah.
figures. By the way, each of the dads brought their own sons, so they were, he had peers with him. And then after that, we'd pray, and we'd do the same crazy adventure stuff the next day. And then I asked each of those men if they would make a challenge for Nathan.
That's
So
right.
there was a physical challenge, there was a spiritual challenge, there was um, a financial challenge, and that he had accomplished within a year. So
Yeah.
he had his 13th year to do it. So my challenge for him was, you have to surf super tubes. It's the main wave in Jeffreys Bay. It's definitely, for a 13-year-old, it's a big ask. And I was like, and not just once. You got to get comfortable out there. So I'll go out there with you, and we're gonna
Mm.
figure this out. And he did. And I remember with absolute joy, like he surfed it several times with me. And then there was a sort of mid-sized day, and I was off to the office, and he was like, "Hey, Dad, can you drop me for the surf?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure. Where do you want to go?" He's like, "Supers." There's my little 13-year-old running down the steps, paddling out through the bottom keyhole at 13 on his own.
Hmm.
And I was like, "Wow, that's so much more than I would have ever done,
Hmm.
ever done at that age." One of the dads actually took some time, and my wife wanted a warm water shower. Jeffreys Bay is cold, like California, and he spent the week with angle grinders and nails and cement, and literally helped build the little outdoor warm water shower at the back of the house. Another dad loaned him some, not, yeah, loaned him some money and said, "Look, I want you to invest this. I'll help you
Yes.
invest this in like an online platform, and I want you to consider how being a good steward of your money and finances will help you." And the fourth challenge was a spiritual one. We want you to be able to share your faith with your friends in an authentic, meaningful way. And those dads committed to two things: one, holding him accountable to deliver on what he had said he would do as a man, as a 13-year-old man.
Hmm.
And the second one, they covenanted, as well as the dads that had sent me that stuff, the video messages, to say, if you ever need anything, we're here for you. You've got this community that's backing you. You're not alone in this world. Mm.
Wow. Um, Roy, I'm imagining the accomplishment of that year in those four spheres, and how that compounds forward. What you learn around finance, what you learn around working with your hands on a physical, like a house project, what you learn from the courage and the like. I mean, to drop in at Super Tooth, and then in the faith side of sharing your faith. If you do that when you're 13, like what you learn when you're 14 and 15 and 16, and um, I'm so inspired by the ways that any of us dads could craft because we've been gifted with friends, mentors, that we just
Mm.
have to, you reaching for letters or videos, you reaching for friends to say, hey, come do this with me. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I just It feels so simple the way you're explaining it right now. Now there is risk, and I actually my mind went to going in off the rocks in Australia, a surfer's paradise just a little south of there, Snapper Rocks. Have you surfed that break before, Snapper Rocks?
Yes, Gold Coast.
Have you gone in off the rocks there?
I've surfed. There's the Super Bank and the big rock. You jump off behind the rock. Is that the one with it onto the beach?
That's it. So it's the waves
Yeah.
crash against the face and shoot the water up, and the surfers that know what they're doing, they just hop in and they glide right down. But if you have
Mm,
long legs like me and you jump a little too late,
mm,
the shooting water will flip you into very
mm.
dangerous sharp rocks. And
Yeah,
so for a month, I watched other people do that, and I paddled around every time. I did all the extra paddling, and then finally, I'm like, "It's time, let's go." But nobody
yeah,
coached me. I
yeah,
went and I watched and I tried to figure it out on my own. And
yeah.
just like your son, like without coaching and fathering,
Mm.
it can be really dangerous. Like it was very dangerous. Me being there
Yes.
without the right coaching, and I just think about earlier, you talked about how God is fathering you in a season that you didn't, because of proximity to your dad in that phase, you didn't know. Um, I think some dads listening right now are like, I'm going to take a tumble and I'm going to hurt myself and hurt my child. Like, how can I do this? I haven't been prepared for this. So I'm going to play it safe a little bit instead of press in with intentionality. I'm going to play it safe, like the tall surfer who paddles around instead of going off the rocks. And what I hear and what I read, won't back down. Like, I want to see, like, I pray for a generation of dads who bring their full hearts and recruit letters and videos and create experiences and go on trips to Thailand and save money and budget money to go with your daughter on these.
Mm.
What would you share with these dads to actually go all in versus kind of do the small deposits and kind of hold back?
Well, I think two things. Firstly, don't, because there is the other side where you go, you try and make something happen, and there's a big, very negative consequence, you know? So I would say don't go, if you're not a surfer, don't go and do some crazy surfy thing. If you're not
Yes.
a bike jumper, don't do a bike jumping thing. And
Uh-huh.
you got to start with where you are. The second thing I'd probably say is don't underestimate how God our Father will help you in that. And I think that's one of the things I said earlier. My passion is the kingdom. And my personal mission statement would be ad regnum Dei, which means for the kingdom. But the thing is, when we think about God and his kingdom, we go, yeah, that's cool. Like, it's spiritually, Christianity. Yeah. But that's not what I'm trying to say here. The real game changer is when we realize that in the kingdom, I'm actually a son. That is my role. That is what I'm called to do. That is what Jesus did. He made me a son. And therefore I serve the king and his kingdom, not as a member of that kingdom, but as a son called to serve my father and be about my father's business. And I think as a dad, what I could say is regardless of where you find yourself, he will start there and he will help you fill in the blanks. And you need to craft and curate something that is right for your son or your daughter. My daughter wanted to surf small, warm waves.
Yeah.
And the journeys that I've been on with her, I was so scared to go on that trip at 16. What am I going to say? What do I say to my teenage daughter? 2 days later, we're whipping around the island on a scooter. I'm driving it, and she is risk averse compared to me and my son. I was like, "You're going to drive the scooter." She's like,
Yeah.
"No, not a chance." But I think you've got to play from who you are as a person. It's got to be authentic, and
Mhm.
you've got to play from a position of where God is there. And I think God invites us into this adventure of fatherhood. And I think for me, my whole life, look, I am a risk taker. In fact, my wife and I joke if especially before I had my daughter, when we got married, she said if she had married somebody else, they would have had a boring life, and if I had married somebody else, I might have killed myself, which is probably true. But the two of us together have brought like
Mhm.
this good balance. But for me, everything changed the day I held my daughter.
Mhm.
I don't know how to explain it to you because I was like, I'm now dad and I have to be here. I can't, disappear. Like I have to be here. And I think that's the thing. Like we it sounds great on the podcast, I guess, and the stories looking back sound fantastic, and we always share our best stories,
Mm,
not our failures. And believe me, there have been monumental failures. But I think God meets us in those spaces, and our Father knows how to be a father.
mm, mm.
He knows better than any of us. And so to any other father on the journey of trying to be the best dad with me and you, I'd say like lean in there first because he's got the grip.
Yeah. Roy, just to end our time, and I'm so grateful for this conversation with you. The the practical things that you would share around leading an organization that has a global footprint and the real demands of travel. You've mentioned practically like say no on their birthdays so that you can be there with the ones that matter most. You mentioned practically like even the Fortnite example of like late night, you're tired and you're playing using digital connection for a lane, a path that is a connection point, and then these strategic trips and the strategic year of 13th year. So these things, play in with trips that you're actually away from your family. What other practical would you say has helped? Again, you've mentioned there's stories of missing it. Anything on the dad listening whose job takes them, it has demands that keeps them away from the family, or brings them on the road. Just any practical wisdom you'd want to share with us?
Yeah, so I think to the I'd say we all have to evaluate ourselves. So the most practical thing on a daily basis, I'd say, is Jesus is too big to be a satellite in our world. Like he is way too big. Like we can't have Christianity as this thing that we have in the top right or left hand corner or orbiting whatever else we're doing.
Yeah.
The simple fact of the way that God, our Father, Jesus, Holy Spirit works is like he realigns everything around his gravity. So the first thing I'd say to your dad who's traveling away and working a lot is on the one hand, that's where you've got to go with this because you got to get to a point of peace where you like I've got the alignment with my Father in heaven right
Mhm.
because everything else will come into alignment after that.
Yeah.
And that might be hard because you might have to make adjustments that you don't want to make. You
Mhm.
might have to recognize that you are trying to keep Jesus and your kids and everyone else in an orbit around something else. Like, what is the center of gravity of your world? And then that's a daily challenge for the rest of our lives. But once we have that center of gravity in the right place, I think the next practical thing is don't beat yourself up because you're on that plane and you can't be there. As I said, my dad passed away, and I didn't have my dad for my teenage years, but my goodness, do I honor him for what he did.
Mhm.
I look at a man that was willing to sacrifice the thing that he loved most to help and allow me and my siblings to have a foot up in this world. That speaks a lot. He's not able to be omnipresent, but he was all present in terms of what he did for us, and the example he set. And when I look at, and then there's other dads and other mentors. The other practical thing I'd say is, look, God, your father will help you, but Pedro, my pastor, Brett Davis, the founder of Christian Surfers. There's other men that have spoken into my life. One of my best mates, his name's um, Ian Coleman. His dad, I was on a trip down to Cape Town. I was living in Jeffreys Bay, and in a tiny little moment, he will not even remember this. He said to me, "How's Sharon doing?" And I said, "I think she's okay." He grabbed my arm, pushed me into the corner, and he said, "Thinking she's okay is not good enough."
Mhm.
I mean, what do you mean? And then he unpacked this life story that he had with his wife, where everything was perfect and he was working and he was achieving in his career and everything was great. And they went to sleep at night. And as he rolled over and kissed her goodnight, she said, "I don't think this is working." He jumped out of bed, going, "What are you talking about?" And they had a
Mhm.
3 hour conversation and made some adjustments.
Yeah.
Well, that little moment from another person in the church, in the congregation, that little moment of wisdom
Mhm.
allowed me to come back home and say, "Hey, love, how are you doing?" And I've never ever asked that question in the same way again.
Mhm.
I'm always actually trying to listen now. How are you really doing? Or am I paying enough attention? Because I think as dads, we want to be charging the hill, and sometimes we don't pay enough attention to the central gravitational stuff that's happening. How's my wife doing? How's my daughter doing? Um, how's my other child doing? Like, and that I'm speaking to myself here, am I being present enough? Even today, maybe one of my failings, not going surfing with my daughter this morning. I probably could have juggled things around. I really had this agenda I needed to get through. And as I'm finishing this podcast, I'm going, you know what? My day would have probably been the same. I would have just taken an hour and I would have surfed with her. And I failed. I mean, but I've got tomorrow.
Got tomorrow. What a great gift that is, right? The perspective of failure, missing it. Oh my goodness. The gift of family is we can say we're sorry and we can say, let's go tomorrow. Roy, I'm so grateful for this conversation. We at one point we're talking about recording actually sitting on surfboards just outside the break. We were going
Yeah.
to do our first sitting in the ocean recording. So maybe that'll be our next round in Jeffers
Good.
Bay. I don't know if you can sit past the break or if the current will pull us too fast to record there in Jeffers Bay. But thank you for this conversation. And Roy, could you say a prayer, a short prayer over all of us dads as we close?
Sure. Oh, Father, I thank you so much that we can bow our heads and be in your presence. I thank you that you are the one who created us, that all the days ordained for us were written in your book before one of them came to be. I thank you that you know where we are right now as we're listening to this or hearing this or in this journey of fatherhood. And you know how to take us to a better place, to be more present, to be more like you. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. So I pray for each dad that you'd meet them by the power of your spirit right now, that you'd encourage them that they have so much to give and so much impact and so much influence to be in the lives of their children. And Lord, that you'd encourage them that the joy of those tiny little moments exist just a yes decision away. Bless them, bless us and keep us. Make your face to shine upon us. Help us to be more like you. In Jesus' name, amen.